So that's taken care of. And I want to welcome all of you to the Eastgate ARC fiscal year 23 pre-application workshop. I am Kathy Zook. I am the Eastgate ARC program manager. And I know we have quite a few people that have joined us today representing various agencies that have expressed an interest in applying this year. So my goal is to give you the tools that you need in order to complete a pre-application. Every point counts. This is our competitive process of the program. So this is your meeting. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself at any time and ask me a question. You can tell I had a little topple here, and I fell and the elbow is broken. So I really can't be watching the chat. So just feel free to go ahead and unmute and we'll get started. So give you a little bit of a background. The ARC districts, 13 states from New York to Mississippi. And within Eastgate, we have 32 counties that make up the Appalachian region. And those are broken into 4 local development districts. Those districts, which Eastgate is one of, are responsible for administering the program. And we do that in partnership with our federal and state partners that provide funding to assist our communities in developing our projects. So to give you an idea too of the timeline, we are beginning our pre-application process now, and the applications are due on May 13th, or pardon me, May 16th by 3 p.m. electronically. Send that to me and I will confirm that that's received and send you a confirmation email. That is a competitive process, so there is a scoring committee, and then it goes before the Eastgate, our TAC, which is the technical, our technical committee, as well as the CAB, and then ultimately our general policy board will finalize the projects. So we will call for the highest scoring applications to complete a full application. And that timeline is generally around September to October, with applications being due in November. And then the successful applications will receive a letter of award more than likely within April 2023 at the earliest, up into midsummer with its federal funding. And that is important because the ARC program is a reimbursement grant. So you cannot, and I'll become a broken record on this, you cannot go to bid, break ground, or make a purchase unless and until you have an award letter in hand that says your project was approved. Because if you do otherwise, then you would lose the funding. We cannot reimburse you if you spend the money before the application is approved. So please don't do that. And then also, who's eligible? We're very flexible. An eligible applicant would be like your local entities, such as your cities, your villages, and your counties, as well as educational institutions. That would be like school districts, community and technical schools, community colleges, as well as universities. Then we also have our public institutions such as port authorities and libraries. And then last would be our nonprofits. That would be like the 501c3. So pretty much the only entity that cannot directly apply as the applicant is your for-profit entities. So I'm going to get into some pointers of the pre-application. And in order for your project to be even considered, you have to meet one of our 5 goals. This is an area that has changed. The ARC federal goals have our new strategic plan. So they're very similar to years past, but you do need to know that they have changed. So goal 1 is for supporting our businesses and our entrepreneurs so that they are creating and retaining jobs. Second is to develop our competitive workforce. So with that, we're looking for projects that will give us that healthy, educated, skilled workforce. And for those projects, that's where you'll find like workforce training, you're expanding access to healthcare, education, and things of that nature. And then third is our infrastructure projects. So that would be water, sewer, broadband, access roads. And then fourth, those are projects that are improving our economy through supporting our tourism and regional culture. And then last, goal 5 deals with community capacity and leadership development. So one thing I want to note for you too, this is in red because it's new, and these are for infrastructure projects. If your project requires a permit to install or a PTI, you cannot submit your application for ARC unless you have a PTI that has been already obtained in your full application. In your pre-application, you don't have to have the PTI, but if you are submitting this year into full application, you must have that before your application will be received, or well, it'll be received, it just will not be scored. Okay, so projects that we can fund, I just mentioned in our goals. Things that we cannot fund would be like your traffic signals, parking lots, flood mitigation, or public safety projects. I know these projects are important, but they are not something that ARC can help you fund. There is the rating criteria. You will find that on page 28 in your pre-application. There are 200 points on this. As I said, it is competitive. Applications that score high must have their funds committed. And by that, I mean, if you've already got the documentation that has been obtained, that is something that would score stronger, then maybe you're applying for funds and you just haven't gotten in your pre-application, you don't have it approved yet. Would need to be approved by the time you go to full application. The number of projects that we can fund is actually determined by how much our allocation is that we receive. Typically, our district receives about 1 million to 1.2 million. So from the scoring that we'll look internally at Eastgate with our scoring committee and our advisory board and the TAC and the general policy board, we also have a level in there that your commissioners from each of your counties, or for whatever county you're from, the commissioners at your county will be able to have input on the project. So please, if you haven't already and you intend to submit an application, please notify your commissioners of the project so they'll be aware of that. All right. There is a match requirement for your ARC projects, and the amount of match is determined by your designation. And for ARC, we have 4 categories, whether it's distressed, at risk, transitional, or competitive. In our region, Mahoning County is listed as a transitional county, which is the match of 50-50. And then also at risk is Ashtabula and Trumbull. Now, what that designation is determined, first of all, Congress makes that determination, partnership with the ARC office, and we're looking at things like unemployment and poverty in order to come up with that. So for this year, this is your funding. In years past, the maximum you've been able to request is up to $250,000. There is a change in that this year as well. I'm very happy to say that. With the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill and our federal budget, we are actually, and by we, I mean all the local development districts throughout the 13 states are expecting to have an increase in our annual allocation. So whereas Eastgate has gotten that 1.2 million, we're expecting to get more this year, which means that infrastructure only projects, if your project is $1 million and above, the maximum you can request on your project is $500,000. If your project is below $1 million, the maximum you can request is $250,000. Now, of course, we have access roads, and that hasn't changed. That's a separate pot of funding, and with that, you can still request up to $500,000 as you have in the past as well. All right, so I think one thing I want to touch upon is assistance for applicants. As we do every year, I'm here to assist you, to guide you through the ARC process. So if you have any questions, I know many of you have already reached out to me and told me what your projects are, which is great. Feel free to contact me. And if you want us to review your proposal at any point up until the due date, we'll be glad to do that. All right. So in putting your application together, there is a very specific format. Eastgate did not create it. All 13 states use it. And we will adhere to that again this year. So it is basically two parts. It's your project proposal summary, which is 13 questions. Actually, I'll show you that. This is the interactive form. It's included in here. You'll need to complete 1 through 13. It is a 2-page maximum length. So your project proposal summary is first, and then you have your attachments A through F. And then the index pages, you use that to separate that. Those index pages are found on page 30 and 35 of this pre-application instruction booklet. And also, when you are submitting your application, you can choose to, put a cover letter in there. That's up to you. After that, there's that's the only option you have to choose. From that point forward, then it's your pre-application, index pages, and your supporting documentation. Please do not use anything smaller than a number 10 font. We had someone one year who micro mini just so they could get all the information there. That's not necessary. The application tells you exactly, how to answer the question. So please make sure that you don't use anything smaller than a 10. And number all your pages. It's not necessary to include like other grants or reports or, anything other than what is asked for. Please don't do that because it would be returned to you for correction. So follow this format. We'll be good. All right, I'm going to just highlight a few areas here for you. I'm not going to go through all 13. But when you're completing the project title, please just keep this short and sweet, clear and concise. If your project is a workforce project, state that in your title. If it's a sewer project or infrastructure or broadband, state that in the title. And then also for number 3, the contact person. This would be the first point of contact of someone who can answer questions about your project and your application. It is not necessarily your executive director or the president of your agency, unless that is the first person you want us to call to talk about, about the specifics of the project. They may be the person who, signs off all of the forms, but not necessarily the go-to person to ask the nitty-gritty questions. Okay, so for county designation, we already talked about that. I want to go really here to the basic agencies. And if your project is a construction project and it receives federal ARC dollars, then it would need a basic agency to administer the project. ARC doesn't administer its own, and we only have a handful of agencies that qualify as the basic agency. So we've got them listed here for you: rural development, CDBG, EDA, EPA, Ohio, Department of Higher Education. And now ODOT is listed, and that's only for access roads. They wouldn't be the basic agency for any other project. And if you do not have funds from any of these agencies in the project, they probably would not likely act as your basic agency, but that's okay. You don't have to worry about that. Ohio has become a self-certifying state. So through the Governor's Office of Appalachia and Ohio Department of Development, we can provide assistance on that to get a basic agency secured. They can actually act as the basic agency for you. At this point in your pre-application, you do not have to secure your basic agency. Just want to let you know about that necessary criteria. So that's not a surprise for you. Now you hear me talking about federal ARC and state ARC. Applicants cannot request which pot of money that would be assigned to their project. That is the local development district. So that's not something that you have to worry about. Just submit your project, and as a local development district, we'll take care of making sure we get the right funding source assigned for you. The other thing I wanted to touch base on is our state goals and our federal goals. This is 6A and 6B in your project proposal summary, that interactive form that I had just mentioned. You can find the state goals in this application booklet. And so that's going to be on page 15 is where it starts. Okay, I just want to show you that. 15, here we go. So here's our state goals. And applicants can only pick one goal and one strategy. And this is basically just copy and paste. So like if it's goal 1 and a strategy 1, you're just going to copy and paste and put that in for 6A. And then our federal goals, you're going to find those beginning on page 23. Or is it 22? Yeah, there we go. These are our new federal goals. So with this, we're going to copy and paste whatever the goal and whatever the strategy is most appropriate for you. And then we just drop it back in our interactive form, which is on page 7. You're going to drop it in here. Don't add any narrative, no further explanation, just copy and paste. Now I will say on this interactive form, a lot of points come from section 8 and section 9. Section 8 is the budget. Every source of funding that you have for your project needs to be noted here. So I'm going to skirt down to an example that's listed on page 9 of your instruction booklet, which is right here. Just so you can see, like this would be an example of a completed one. So we have our categories, the source of funding, the amount of funding. Now notice these are whole dollars. Do not put any cents, please. This is whole dollars only. The percentage of the total, and then the program or the funding agency where it is coming from, and then the status of your funds. So your first one is going to be this application, ARC. In this example, the applicant is looking for $200,000. I should also mention for applicants requesting more than $150,000, sometimes the amount you're requesting can be adjusted. That's depending on how much funding we have. So just be aware that your funding request, what you're asking for may not be the amount that you actually would be allocated. And as the local development district, we would keep you apprised of that. So $200,000, you've got your percentage in here. And for ARC requests, round this up to the nearest hundredth. You don't have to do that for the other sources, but when you're requesting ARC funds, round that up to the nearest hundredths. Of course, that's going to be this application. Now, you're going to list every funding source that you have noted to get you to your total project cost. Think of ARC funds as the last funding in to fill a gap of an unmet need. So you know what your project is, you know your total project cost, you have your funding sources secured or applied at this stage for pre-application. And so you're going to list them. So if you have a grant, maybe it's USDA, put the amount, the percentage, and committed. If it's committed, then you provide that supporting documentation from USDA in the amount that they said they're contributing to for the project, and put that in attachment C, which is your supporting documentation. I'd like to make note on the CDBG, if you have that as a funding source within your application, then you must notify CDBG that you are also applying for ARC funds. That is one of their requirements. It is not ours, but make sure if you're seeking both that you notify them right away. In this example, the applicant is applying for CDBG. It's not committed, but they did apply, looks like 3/15 of 22. So they're waiting for notification, but as of May 16th, when they're submitting this application, they're saying that it's applied, it's not committed. Applicants that have committed funding sources, of course, score higher, but this is applied in the pre-application, that's okay. Here we go. Then also note if you have any local funds or private foundation, businesses and so forth here. Whatever this number is as your total project cost, that's what you're going to include in attachment A to support that. Make sure those numbers are the same. Consistency is the key within your pre-applications. Whatever you call the title, make sure it's the same thing all the way through. Whatever you say your total project cost is, make sure it's the same all the way through your grant application. Okay. Now, another thing that I always make note of for applicants, once your funding sources have been submitted and approved by Eastgate, an applicant is not permitted to change their funding sources without Eastgate's approval from this point forward. And by that, I mean, if your project is selected to go to full application, you cannot change this section. The reason being, we're not telling you can't change your funding source. We just didn't need to know about it before you do it, because sometimes if you change your funding source, you might lose the ability to have one of the other matching sources with it. We had that happen to a grantee before, so that's why we're here to assist you, not to make it more difficult. All right, so that takes care of our budget section. The other one I mentioned has a lot of points, and that is in number 9, your project description. This is basically the who, what, where, and when of your project. There's several bullets here. Make sure you address each and every bullet when you're answering this, because every point does count. First thing is, in this project description, your first sentence needs to tell us exactly what the project is and where it is located. So if you're an access road in Ashtabula, you want to state in your first sentence that you're seeking ARC funding for the access road located at Ashtabula, Route 534, whatever. Be very specific about what your project is and where it's located. And then also tell us who is going to own and maintain the project. And then tell us what type of entity are they? Are they a public entity? Are they a nonprofit? Are they a port authority? That is what you would note in this section as well. In being specific, things that we want to know is the size and specs of your project. So what is the linear feet? How many gallons? How many people are you going to serve? How many people you're going to train? Or how many people will be receiving access to healthcare? That's the type of information that you're going to put in here as well. Also, there is the timeline that's required. Let us know when or the month in which your project is going to start, and then when it's going to end. And I would say, even if you think your project's only going to take 6 months to complete, always give yourself a 12-month start and end period. You'd be surprised, the projects seem to take longer than we think. So give yourself at least 12 months. And then also make just a statement on how your project will improve existing conditions. And the last thing too, we want to see that you're showing local support for the project. So by that, I mean, if you have support letters from area businesses, your local elected officials, maybe trustees, commissioners, that is where you want to add a sentence here, list all those entities that support the project, and then provide that documentation in attachment C, which is your support letters and so forth. Then the last item I want to point out on the project proposal summary is outcomes and outputs. This is our performance measures. And sometimes this can seem a little bit confusing, but in this section for number 12, don't put any narrative. This is only bulleted. You can see on the example, bullet your answers. And to get an idea of what we're looking for in performance measures and your outcomes and outputs, that is actually on page 17 of your application here. I'll just kind of quickly go down to that. Okay. Page 17. You can see it's only a one pager that tells you the outputs and outcomes. And then you've got several pages that define all of the items listed there. So that's where you would go in order to complete the outputs and outcomes. To give you an example of when you're doing an infrastructure project, here's where we're wanting to see specifics. So your outputs are going to be like your linear feet, you're maybe serving an LMI, how many households, how many businesses, and how many communities are served. And then your outcomes are going to tell me how many of those entities served are going to be improved. This will also be where if your project has job creation and job retention, you note that in the outcomes. Okay, now if we have as say an example for workforce development, here we're going to be very specific and we're going to say, okay, we are, as an output, we are constructing a workforce development center serving 10 communities, 60 students, 8 schools, 20 businesses, and 15 organizations. The outcomes are going to be slightly different than that because we know of the 60 students that we're serving, maybe not all of them graduate, so they have 50 improved. This one does not show an example of job creation and retention, but if you do have the job creation, job retention, there's specific criteria that has to be met in order to have that. We have to have documentation from the entity, from the business, will say on their letterhead, signed by the appropriate person, saying how many jobs this project will create and how many it will retain. And for ARC purposes, job to retain has a very specific, what should I say, a very specific definition. And that's also on page 12 and page 20. But if this individual is going to keep their job, whether the project moves forward or not, that's good for the person. However, that is not job retention as far as ARC is concerned. Job retention only counts if that individual is going to lose their job unless this project moves forward. So maybe the company is going to relocate or go elsewhere or go out of business. The employer letter would need to state that, and then that would count as a job retained. Okay, so items 1 through 13 make up the project proposal summary, which is a 2-page maximum. And then we start into the attachments. As I mentioned, there are 3 types of projects: are construction, non-construction, and access roads. So in attachment A, you want to show us your project cost estimate, whatever that is. If it's your equipment, if it's your sewer line, we need to see how you came up with the figure in the budget, which was item 8, how that figure was reached. This is your supporting documentation for that. Then B is your project support letters and your job retention and creation. And again, here's where you're going to find those definitions for job creation and job retention. Not every project does have it, but if you note it as one of your outcomes and outputs and your performance measures, then you would need to have supporting documentation for that. Then attachment C, that is where you're putting those commitment letters. And what we're looking for in the letter, again, is the title and the amount of match that they are contributing, and signed by the appropriate agency and on their letterhead. You could also use an email too. It's just as long as it's confirming that. Attachment D is your memorandum of understanding. That's all on page 25 and 26 of this pre-application booklet. So just have your appropriate person sign that. And then attachment E is your compliance letters. Not every project has this, but if you do, maybe a letter from the Ohio EPA or the Ohio Department of Health, maybe ODOT, the Ohio Department of Education, maybe the Army Corps of Engineers, whatever entity, if it applies for you, just put it in here. And then your timeline, which is attachment F, make sure you put your start date and your end date. And that's that takes care of our attachments. So let me just go up here. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So that, in a nutshell, is how to put together the ARC application, pre-application. And I'd like to open it up and say, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. And I'll take a drink of water while I field your questions. Let me see.
If we, oh, go ahead.
I have one, Kathy. This is JP Ducro. Under the local match, is that a combination of potentially county funds and maybe township funds? If you have a couple different governmental entities that are going to share, does that all just fall under a total for local match?
The local match generally comes from the applicant, whether that would be like the Asheville Commissioners or maybe a nonprofit. But if you have other funding sources, would that be like a grant from another entity, or are they just like kind of supplementing your general fund?
Well, like, for example, if it were to be a broadband project that would be impacting one of the rural townships, it may be something that we as a county would want to provide some funding to, but potentially that township might have money that they, have available from their general fund or possibly from the ARPA dollars that they would be, willing to contribute also if it helped increase the chance of them getting broadband access in their community.
Mm-hmm. I would say those would be local dollars under the commissioner's umbrella, because if that entity would something happen and then they not be able to provide the funding, then I'm assuming that you would make up the difference.
Okay.
So now ARPA funds, that process is evolving. So I don't have a specific answer on that. I would say that if it is ARPA funds, we would have to identify those as ARPA funds because those are federal funds. So anything other than ARPA funds, it would be coming through you as the commissioners, I would say would be local.
Okay, thank you.
I can't see anyone. No.
So YBI was considering, we have a new piece of equipment that is arriving tomorrow from Israel. And in order to take full advantage of this, we need to buy some additional support equipment. And I know we had briefly talked on this. What would make this application fundable? I know because we can't just specifically ask for dollars for equipment and capital. What would we have to add into that to make it fundable?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. What are you trying to seek reimbursement for the equipment?
No, it wouldn't be. So we already have the funding in place for the main piece of equipment, but there's some other supporting equipment that we would need to, complete the technology, a furnace, a washing station, some other things like that, that we would need as support equipment. First of all, can we use the machine itself as match? So that's the first question. And then this is a pretty new and innovative technology. It doesn't exist. There's only like 2 or 3 of these machines, but there's nothing like this regionally. So we would like to make this machine an offering available, maybe some training or classes or something like that. So adding workforce training in, but can we purchase the supporting equipment to run the machine underneath this program?
Sorry, I must not have muted my own phone. How terrible. Let me answer your question in 2 parts. I should have mentioned in kind. In kind, you can use as match in your application up to a maximum of 20% of your ARC ask. So if you're asking for 20%, or pardon me, if you're asking for $200,000 in ARC grant funds, the maximum in kind you could request, which would be 20%, is $40,000. Things that can be used as in kind are equipment, professional services, land donation. So to answer your question, yes, that piece of equipment can be used as in-kind match for your supporting equipment that you need, that you want to supplement. So I would imagine you'd be coming to this year's funding request saying you need, X, Y, and Z equipment for YBI to supplement this equipment that you're going to use as in-kind match. You can do that.
Okay. And then we physically have to pay for this piece of equipment as well. So can we use the money that we paid for that as our cash match to this?
You're getting in the weeds on that one. I'd have to say, I have to kind of think about it, because again, you cannot make a purchase, go out to bid and before you have award. The equipment can be used as in-kind match, but it has to be paid. You can't use that payment then as part of cash.
Okay. Okay. Got it. I think.
It gets a little murky and gray. The short answer is the equipment can be used as up to 20% of your in-kind match.
So we're getting some dollars from Jobs Ohio to pay for the piece of equipment. Then there's a portion of YBI's dollars that are, being paid for the equipment. And then obviously we have facility upgrades, compressed air, things like that, that we have to pay for during, the installation. So I guess I was looking with those items that we are paying to get this system up and running, be part of that.
Yeah, we'll have to look at the pieces and parts on that.
Okay.
And
then
this is Dustin.
Training would be an allowable project like we're talking about.
Workforce training, yes.
Okay, so if we combine that along with the equipment purchase and then the training program on that piece of equipment, would be a fully fundable project.
Yes, you can, in the same application, request for equipment and workforce training.
And with the max ask of 250.
250, because it's not an infrastructure project.
Okay, so a max ask of 250 with matching funds for a total project of 500.
Well, it could be above 500,000, yes, but the
But-
maximum you can request is 250,000.
Okay.
Yes, and I'd like to mention too, with your ARC, so you're successful, you go to full application, you've got your award letter. That's when your time starts. We'd like to see your funds were spent and reimbursed within a 12-month period.
So it would be a 12-month workforce project.
Yeah, and that's for all applicants. Since ARC is coming in at the end to fill a gap of an unmet need, we're last money in, we want your project implemented and your ARC funds spent within a 12-month period. You can request an extension, especially we're in Northeast Ohio, we get snow and, sometimes that may slow down your construction, but we really like to see things accomplished within a 12-month period. And Dustin, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If we're a government entity and we own land and we're going to do a construction project, what kind of documentation would we need to have to utilize the land as part of the match or in kind or what have you? What's the preferred documentation for that if the land is already purchased and in possession, so to speak, and it's being leveraged as in kind or match?
You would have to show ownership of the land, whether, by copy of the title or maybe through the auditor's website, something to show title.
Okay, so would we need to have any kind of an appraisal or anything like that attached, or just a receipt, so to speak, of purchase it or
No,
deed?
The appraisal was has to be within a 2-year period and to show title.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy, I have another question. It's JP. Regarding the basic agency, number 5, is
Yes.
that needed for a broadband project? Or does every project need to have a basic agency?
No, only construction projects with federal money, federal funding assigned to it. So broadband in the past has not been considered construction. So they flip back and forth on that. Are you looking at fiber in the ground?
I don't know. We've had projects that we've looked at here at the county level that have been fiber in the ground as well as fixed wireless solutions also. So I don't know.
Yeah. In the past, they have not considered broadband construction projects, which always was odd to me. But for example, we did the broadband project there at the Ashtabula Airport, Ashtabula, and that was not considered a construction project. So even if they would switch it to a construction project, we can always look at Ohio Department of Development to act as the basic agency. So we'd be able to fill that criteria for you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. And as you develop your projects, please give me a call. I'll be glad to assist you, to guide you through the process. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to contact me.
When does the PreApp due?
It is due on May 16th, which is a Monday at 3 p.m. You can submit it before that, but no later than 3 p.m. to send it to my email address, kzook@eastgatecog.org. That is also on our website, and I'm sure you got the invitation link for that. I will send you a confirmation email to let you know that your application was received. If you don't get that confirmation email, definitely give me a call. We haven't had any that weren't received, but just in case.
And when would awards be identified or awarded?
We're looking at April 2023 to July 2023.
So it's a full year before you get an answer back after this application.
No, I wouldn't say that. This is the pre-application period. This is the competitive side. So applicants that score the highest and we have our allocation determined, usually that's about anywhere from 8 to 10 projects. Those projects will be invited to complete a full application. Full applications are, we announced that in like August. September, you submit those applications in October. So really that's when the process starts for award, when you go to full application and submit that application to Eastgate. So that would be November this year. And then we would, go through the process here at your local development district. It goes to the state and to the Fed. And then from there, you will get notice of award. So that's why it could be in April to August. Federal projects always take longer than state projects.
What happens in the event that you submitted for a project and then maybe you submitted for the same project through another grant and found out that you were awarded through another grant during this process? What happens? Do you then just sort of cancel it? Can you potentially reallocate to another project, or that's why you have kind of backup second and third projects that if somebody doesn't follow through on one of the ones that scored higher, that may allow funding to be available for another project? How does that work?
As an applicant, if you decide you no longer want to be considered for ARC funding in this fiscal year, you would need to contact me either by phone or by email, but then submit a written notice that you are withdrawing your application. You would not have the ability to, change your application, like, if you to a different project as the applicant. You do not have that discretion. So your project would fall out of contention, and then as the local development district, the projects in our priority list that were not funded would then be considered.
Okay.
Kathy, I have a quick question. Sheila from Glen Bay. If I were looking at workforce and infrastructure, are we looking at state dollars only, or would that go to both the state and the Fed for consideration?
The local development district would, the local development district is the entity that designates what your funding would be, either federal or state. And that depends on a whole host of factors, from total project cost to basic agency status and a whole host of things. So as the applicant, you don't have the ability to pick and choose. And we do not designate like all workforce projects go to federal or all construction go to federal. It's a mix.
Okay, because I have a complication, but I'll email you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I also have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I've been asked by the City of Niles to apply for a waterline project. I see on page 3, I don't remember seeing this before, that public water and sewer projects must be addressing an EPA mandate or findings or orders.
Yeah, that's actually been in there forever. You probably didn't notice that last year as, but it, your project, it depends on where your project is. Is it in an LMI? Do you have local, economic development in there? There's a whole host of things we can work with you on to make sure that, you get in the right category there. What's your project? Do you know, what's the location? Is it in a low to moderate income area?
Right now, I don't know if it is or not.
Okay, yeah, and you know, you are in Trumbull County, so there's a whole lot of things we can do within Trumbull County there to assist you, but it very much like the project that I know the city of Niles was successful in last year. We'll tie it into like health and safety and economic development and things of that nature. So I think you'll be all right there.
Thank you.
Sure. We always want to develop good projects within the Appalachian region. It's just terrible. You would think in this day and age that we'd have clean, safe drinking water, and so many communities actually still don't. So that's a high priority for Appalachia, especially Appalachia, Ohio. We will work with our projects to do everything we can to make sure that you fit the criteria you need to get funded. Okay then, well, it sounds like we have addressed all your questions. I hope I haven't scared you away from the application process, but feel free to reach out to me at any time, and we'll look forward to receiving your applications on May 16th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.